Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I have a wild labor story for you. I will just start off by saying that my labor and delivery went the exact opposite of what I thought it would, of what I envisioned and what I hoped for. Before I get into all that, for those of you who are new, my name is Marla. I am a mom of 4. I have an 8-year-old, 6.5-year-old, and a 5.5-year-old, and then just had a baby who is now, when I'm filming this video, 13 days old. So I have a lot to share with you. My son actually had quite a few complications that involved us staying in hospitals and going to different places. So I'm going to get into all of that right now. All right, so for those of you who have not watched my pregnancy updates, I was getting real labor contractions. My child was OP, so posterior. All my kids were posterior, which means they're facing their face and all that, and limbs are facing my front, so my tummy, and that puts a lot of pressure on my tailbone. I had previously fractured my tailbone during labor and delivery with all my other kids. It's happened every time. This time was no different, but it was actually much worse. I'll get into that, but they were all backwards, and because of their position, and all my kids are really large, they put a lot of pressure on my back and my pelvic floor and my tailbone. So prior to me being in labor, for about 1 to 2 months before I was in labor, I was getting real labor contractions, and I kept thinking maybe today's the day, because they were real. They weren't Braxton Hicks, they were painful, they would come at regular intervals, but the difference was that they ended up stopping, so they never progressed. I assumed that with that, my labor would be smooth and quick because I was doing a lot of the work beforehand. Well, that was not the case. Leading up to my labor, I ended up, by the way, going 10 days overdue. And if you didn't watch my Meet My Baby video, my son, who I had, Liam, he was 8 pounds and 12.2 ounces and 22 inches long. So he was a really big baby. And like I said, I went 10 days overdue. But my initial plan, I'm going to share with you what I initially envisioned for my labor, and then I'll go into exactly what happened, and you'll see why it was very different and very, in my opinion, traumatic. This was hands down the worst labor of all of my kids. The most excruciating pain, the longest, the craziest, the most stressful, you name it, this was the worst, which, believe it or not, I thought it couldn't get worse than my first. And I thought, having my 4th baby, he'll fly out and it'll be easy. That was not the case. So what I was hoping to have was a home birth, and obviously no medications. I wanted 100% natural, delayed cord clamping. I didn't want the oxytocin for passing the placenta. I wanted to just do it, my body to do it on its own. I did not want IVs. I did not want antibiotics, nothing like that. I was negative for group B strep, so I didn't need antibiotics, but I just wanted 100% natural birth. For my son, I said no to the eye ointments. I just wanted completely natural. Well, that didn't exactly happen. So I'm going to go through my story now and explain what actually happened. So he was born on July 28th. So on July 27th or 26th, technically, I went to the hospital. So my midwife came here. I was, at that point, 8 days overdue. She came to my house and she said, let's do a stretch and sweep and try to get things moving along. So we did the stretch and sweep. After the stretch and sweep, they monitor the baby's heart rate for a little bit, just to see how everything went after the stretch and sweep and make sure there's no distress. As she was listening to his heart rate, she heard quite an intense heart arrhythmia. So it would go ba-bum, 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 and then ba-bum, and then ba-bum, 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 ba-bum. And it would just be like this really irregular arrhythmia or heartbeat. And sorry, no makeup, hair's not done. It's been wild. I'm telling you guys, I haven't had a minute for myself, so just don't mind the appearance here. So anyway, she heard an arrhythmia, and automatically she was really concerned. It also, because it was not a mild arrhythmia, she was hearing like at least 11 to 15 different irregular beats per minute, and she was really concerned about that. So after the stretch and sweep, she said, I highly suggest we go to the hospital and have a hospital birth, because they wanted to do the continual fetal monitoring the entire time during labor, because what she was saying was that if my contractions, you know, were getting more regular and stronger and he has this arrhythmia, it could actually cause him to get into an accelerated heart rate, essentially having a heart attack if he's not recovering between the contractions. She said at home births, there's no way to monitor that. They have the Doppler they can kind of randomly listen to, but they don't get that continual monitoring where they can see how his heart is accelerating and decelerating. So right away, I was almost in tears because I was at that point over a week overdue. I had everything completely ready for a home birth. And I had just finally accepted the idea that I would have a home birth after my entire pregnancy of them telling me I can't because my iron was so low. So once I got my iron up a little bit and they said yes to a home birth, I was so happy. And so getting this information was obviously really stressful and really frustrating for me. My husband went back and forth deciding what we want to do. She said a lot of times arrhythmias will correct themselves after birth. A lot of times they can be a lot more serious, and there's no way to know which way this is going to go. So she was highly recommending it. She says they've never done a home birth where the child has arrhythmias like this. She says they always end up doing hospital, so they're not super comfortable, but at the end of the day, they'll do what I decide. I was in tears. My husband and I were taking a lot of time to decide about it. At this point, after the stretch and sweep, I did start getting a lot of contractions. They were getting more regular, more painful. So I called my midwife and I said, okay, we are going to have a hospital birth. And I was really worried about that, but at the end of the day, I wanted what was best for baby. I had a really bad experience with hospital births before and a beautiful experience with my home birth. And so I wanted a home birth so bad. But anyway, she had then said, okay, let's go to the hospital now. I want to do a non-stress test. So I'm just looking at my notes here. Okay, so we did a non-stress test at the hospital. She just wanted to make sure everything was fine with these arrhythmias that she was hearing. So she did the stretch and sweep. We packed up, went to the hospital that next morning. We got the non-stress test done. We sat there for about, I think we were there for an hour or two with the monitors on my belly, monitoring how the baby's heart was reacting to my contractions. I also had some blood work done and a bunch of other tests to see if everything was okay. At that point, the arrhythmias were actually worse. They did hear more of them, and she was still really concerned, and again was like, are you sure you want to do a hospital birth, because we really advise it. My husband and I decided, okay, yes, we will do a hospital birth for sure. Now at this point, my bubble got bursted a little bit more. We were at the hospital during the non-stress test and his heart rate was getting a little bit more irregular. So the pediatrician came in, or the OBG, and she said, I highly suggest we induce you now, because by this point I was about 9 days overdue. She says, let's induce you now. I am not comfortable with you going much longer with his heart rate being so irregular. We don't know why it's irregular. They did an ultrasound, by the way, which I'll touch on in a second. But she says, we don't know why his heart rate is so irregular, but this is very concerning, and I don't know if you should be going much longer since you're already over a week overdue. Your baby's looking really large. I don't think you should go much longer with this. And I was beside myself, because if you guys don't know, getting an induction means a couple things, and they're really traumatic things for me based on what happened with my other births. Number one, an induction means, first of all, your contractions come like crazy. There's no gaps in between. There's no time to just relax and collect yourself. It's just one to the next to the next. And with back labor, if you have not had back labor before, praise Jesus, but if you have, you will understand the excruciating pain that is back labor and how much worse it is than just regular, if your baby's faced the regular way. Now add a fractured tailbone to that and having a large baby, and the pain is really unbearable. So having an induction just makes it 1,000 times worse as far as pain goes, which then makes it more likely that you'll need pain medication or interventions. The other thing is that you have to have an IV, obviously, if you're getting induced. And every time I've gotten an IV, they've had to poke me like 100 times. They can never find the vein. And I end up getting massive swelling and bruising and all kinds of issues. And it's really uncomfortable, because when you're getting an induction and you have an IV, you're so limited to where you can walk and move, and you're uncomfortable. You're not able to be free. And so that obviously makes the laboring process a lot harder. So anyway, I was like, I cannot have an induction. The midwife saw how distressed I was and I was in tears, like everything was just not going the way I planned. And I said, I'll do a hospital birth. I do not want an induction. She said to me, we'll give you till tomorrow morning. Go home, rest, because we were at the hospital all day at this point. I've had so much bad news at this point. They did the ultrasound on the baby. They said the baby looks big, but he seems underdeveloped. Fast forward, I will tell you right now that the ultrasound technician was wrong, because when he came out, he was fine. But what she was picking up on the ultrasound showed that he was underdeveloped, and they were not sure why as well. They thought it could be something with the heart. So they were just stressing me out the entire day. So I said, you know what, let me just go home. I said, do one more stretch and sweep. At this point, it was 24 hours since my previous one. I said, let's just do one more stretch and sweep and see if anything happens. So she did a stretch and sweep and then said, go home, see if you go into labor on your own, and if not, come back in the morning and we'll do an induction. I said, I don't want an induction. So then she said, come back in the morning and we'll break your waters and see if that does anything. And I felt better with that because it didn't involve oxytocin or IVs at that point. And I was like, maybe my body, I mean, I'm so overdue. My body's got to do something at this point. So we did a second stretch and sweep. Within about 10 minutes, my contractions started very, very strong again. They were about 3 minutes apart, one after the next after the next. We went out, my husband and I went out. My mom had the kids. So we went out for a dinner date. It was our last one before baby. The entire time at the restaurant, we paid the bill right up front because I said we might need to dash. The entire time, the contractions were going from 3 minutes to 2.5 and then 1 minute apart. I was in active, full labor in the restaurant. My husband and I packed up. We started, driving around, and I said, let's go for a walk because I need this kid out. I do not want to get an induction. I was ready to go. So we went for a walk near the hospital, and as I was walking, the contractions were so much stronger, all in my back and way more frequent. So I called the midwife and I said, listen, I think I'm in labor fully. I don't know how quickly this baby's gonna come, but based on my track record with my other kids, he's probably going to come quickly because my other labors were really short. So she said, I'm coming to the hospital and I'm gonna sleep at the hospital because it was really late by this point. She said, that way, if you are in labor, I'm close by, and if not, then I'll just go home in the morning. So she went to the hospital and slept there. Well, about an hour or two later, my contractions stopped. So I didn't end up going to the hospital. I went to my mom's, who lives really close, and I tried to sleep at her place so I didn't have to be too far from the hospital in case things picked up again. But even with all the walking and everything else, my contractions still stopped. So my stretch and sweep was at 2:30 on July 25th. It was extremely painful, by the way. At that point, I was 2.5 centimeters dilated when she checked me. And like I said, my contractions started, but then they stopped. We went for a walk around 8 p.m., which I just mentioned, and I started getting more contractions, and I felt baby drop a lot too. So that was good. So some things were happening, but then again, it just stopped. Just like it's been doing all along. All before I went into labor, I would get these contractions that would stop. She did a stretch and sweep, I got contractions, and then they stopped. She did a second stretch and sweep, I got contractions, and then they stopped. So my body just wasn't progressing. So I went to bed. My husband and I ended up coming home actually to our house here because I said, you know what, my contractions have stopped. I need to sleep, and I wasn't sleeping well at my mom's. I wanted a shower. I wanted to get some more things from the house. So I said, let's go home, relax, go back in the morning to the hospital, which is what we did. So at around 11 a.m., I had lost my mucus plug. So the contractions were 3 minutes apart and they went down to 1 minute, but then nothing happened. So when I went home, I got a great sleep. I wasn't in pain or anything, so I slept great, and that was the last restful night of sleep up until today. So we went to the hospital for 10 a.m. I was 3 centimeters dilated and my cervix was softer than before, so the stretch and sweep was doing something. They broke my water at 11:20 that day, so this is technically when my official labor began. Even though I was in full labor, minutes apart and all that, the 2 days before, this was when officially we say labor began. They broke my water at 11:20 a.m. on the 27th. Active labor began at 12:30. I started walking around the hospital room, one contraction after the next. I was losing a lot of my water still continuously. It was clear, there was no meconium in it, which was great, and the contractions really started picking up. So we were at the hospital. It's about 12, just after 12 right now. They just took me off the monitor. They were checking his heart rate and stuff, but they did break my water. and we are hoping that I go into labor on my own so I don't have to get induced, as I really don't want that. Midwife is giving me some homeopathics right now, so we'll see how that goes. It's now 12:30. About 20 minutes ago, the midwife gave me 200 C of calophyllum, and I've been having, I haven't been tracking how frequent, but pretty strong contractions since. It's all in the back, so a lot of back labor, but things are starting, and I'm really hoping this will just keep going, because yesterday night my labor stalled, so I'm hoping that's going to pick back up and just go on its own, and I can be spared the induction. But it seems like the homeopathics and the water breaking are working. She checked my cervix at 3 p.m., which was about 3.5 or 2.5 hours later after they broke my water and labor began. And I went from 3 centimeters to about 6. She said maybe 7 centimeters dilated. This point, by the way, my contractions were so close together and in so much pain that I was already exhausted, but I was managing. I said, you know what, like, my pain tolerance is really, really high. I've got this, so it's not a problem. Well, I thought my labor would be over soon, and it would not be. It just was continuing to get a little crazier from here. 5 p.m. rolls around, and what kept happening since she broke my water is I'd get a massive cluster of contractions, and then my labor would stop again. We realized why labor kept stopping, and it was because my son was actually hitting my tailbone and was not hitting my cervix, and so was not progressing into the birthing canal properly, and therefore the contractions were almost useless. They're just pushing him against my tailbone. Nothing was actually happening, and so the pain was excruciating. I didn't have any pain meds here. I was exhausted. The labor was going on and on and on, and no progression. So we realized that later on that's what was happening. But in the meantime, they said, we don't know why you're not getting regular contractions. What's going on here? I was in so much pain. The back, I felt like my back was snapping, and I was like, this is getting unbearable and I can't do it anymore. So the midwife suggested I do sterile water injections, which I was considering beforehand. Let me tell you, she said she's never had them done on herself, but she told me they felt like a bee sting. And so I was like, I can handle a bee sting way more than I can handle these contractions. So I agreed to it, and I said, you know what, let's just do it after. They were trying to convince me, and I kept saying no at the beginning. I'm like, I don't want any more pain. And they said, but you'll feel so much better. So I ended up agreeing to it. We had sterile water injections at 5 p.m. I have never screamed like that in my life. The pain was excruciating. She did it while I was at the height of my contraction, so I was already in pain from my contraction. I only had one midwife there at the time, so she didn't have 2 people at the same time doing the injections, and the injections are on my lower back. So she just had to do one at a time. My husband said he's never seen me in that much pain before. And I've pushed out 3 massive babies backwards. That is something I would never do again. They were brutal. Did they help with back pain? Yes-ish. My pain was so bad though that it barely took the edge off. It was just a slight improvement. But on top of that, for me, they only lasted half an hour, and I was told they'd last about 2 to 3. So that was brutal as well, where I went through the insane amount of pain for such a short gain. To me, at the end of the day, I would never have done it again. But anyway, I had the sterile water injections. That was a brutal process. They wore out after a little bit, and I labored on my own for a few more hours, no progressing. I had brutal back pain, and at this point, I was in labor for so long, probably 7-8 hours, but nothing happening. Every time they check me, they're like, you're still 6 centimeters. There's no progression. The pain was just getting to the point where I was like, my back cannot take it anymore. I was in all positions, by the way. We did hands and knees. I did the ball. I was walking. I was not just sitting on a bed. I was doing everything I could. During this time, they were still monitoring baby and me. So I said, I need a pain relief, and I wanted to hold on as long as I possibly could. I said, I will not do pain relief. I'm going to hold on. But it got to the point where I was like, I cannot continue labor like this if I don't get something. And I knew I still had a long way to go. I held off until I was about 9 centimeters dilated. Right before I was going to get the pain medication, I said, check me. I need to know if I'm about to push this kid out, because then I'm not doing pain meds, or if I have a long way to go. They checked me and I was 9 centimeters dilated. So I held on right until the end, and the contractions were so close together and so brutal. I was like, I need something now. The reason why I took pain meds at 9 centimeters, which is pretty close to pushing time, is because I consistently push my kids out for 3 hours because of their position. And so with that, the midwife said, if you cannot hold on to handle this amount of pain for another 3 hours, get a pain medication because you are losing it. I was at the point where I was like, I literally want to die. And like my friend says, you know, somebody mentioned to her one time, if there's a gun in the room, you'd probably use it. I was at that point. I was begging to die, and it was really traumatic and a really dark time for me, but I was begging to die. Anyway, so I asked for pain meds and I said, what are my options? They said morphine, fentanyl, or an epidural. I said, I don't want an epidural because at this point I did not have an IV yet and I was not induced, minus them breaking my water. So I said, I don't want an epidural. I don't want IVs. I didn't like the idea of the side effect of epidural potentially causing permanent paralysis. So I said, I'll do morphine. They went to the doctor. The doctor says, nope, she can't get morphine. It lingers too long in the system, and because she's so close to pushing out the baby, we don't recommend it. So instead they gave me fentanyl. I was so scared of fentanyl. I kept saying, no, I don't want fentanyl, because I didn't look into the side effects before I went into the hospital. I didn't even know they offer it. It sounded scary to me, and I was like, this is not something I want to do. But the pain was so bad, the midwife was like, you either are going to get something to help relieve the pain or you are going to pass out. She's like, what do you want? So at this point, I was like, just give me the fentanyl. What I didn't realize was fentanyl only lasts 20 minutes and it barely takes the edge off. So I'm sitting there waiting for it to kick in. And while it helped a teeny bit, I was in excruciating pain still. I was like, this is not enough. What is going on? And within about 20 minutes, I felt completely back to myself again with extreme pain. And the midwife had then said, oh, fentanyl only lasts 20 minutes, which is why the doctor recommended it. It moves through the system quickly. It doesn't linger, so it has less effects on the baby. And I was like, I need another dose now. And she's like, well, you can't get another dose. You have to wait an hour between doses. So we'll give you another dose in an hour. And I was losing it. I was like, I cannot do this. Anyway, I ended up doing it, but just excruciating pain. They gave me another dose finally of the fentanyl. It wore off quickly again the second time. Like I said, I was 9 centimeters dilated for so long, I couldn't bear it. And anyone who has given birth, when you're 9 centimeters, you know how bad that pain is. And like I said, add in all of the back labor and everything else, and it was intense. So I then said, give me an epidural. They called the anesthesiologist in, and she says, no, we can't do an epidural at 9 centimeters. She's like, the baby's coming out. And they said, no, the baby's not coming out. The baby's stuck and she cannot handle any more pain. At this point, I was in labor for about 12 hours, just losing my mind of excruciating pain. So when she came in and saw how much pain I was in, she's like, okay, we're doing this epidural. So they got everything ready. I got the epidural, which was a whole process in and of itself because I had excruciating, I keep saying this word, but there's no other word to describe it. It's horrible pain during contractions, and you have to stand still for the epidural. Normally women get the epidural at the start of labor, so it's so manageable to sit still. But for me, I was at the height of my labor, horrible back pain and contractions, and they're like, you cannot move a limb. That was really hard, but I got the epidural. It started to take effect in about 20 minutes. Now, the scary part for me was that there's actually an epidural or catheter shortage at the hospital while I was there, and it's still going on. And they said to me, there's a bad batch of epidurals and they're only lasting about 20 to 40 minutes. So we're giving you an epidural, but we can't guarantee you're gonna get more than 20-minute relief. I was panicking because I was like, if this wears off, I have nothing left to get me through this. And the pain was just unbearable at this point. Like, I actually wanted to die. I was in labor and the fentanyl had made me groggy enough that I was actually almost passing out. My blood pressure was dropping really, really low. They were monitoring it the whole time because I guess fentanyl can do that. And as my blood pressure was dropping so low, I was kind of passing in and out of consciousness. The midwife had to keep waking me up and keep me awake because she was scared that I was like literally going to pass out permanently. And so as I was kind of going in and out of this state, I was hoping that as I would like pass out, I wouldn't wake up. I have never wanted to die before. And this was that time, and I was like, I couldn't believe that I was wishing that, but in the moment it was just too much. So anyway, I ended up going for the epidural. It was horrible, but I knew I needed that to get me through. So I had the epidural and I started numbing everything, but I was still so scared because every contraction that I got, I was like, is this gonna be the one that's gonna hurt again? Waiting for this epidural to wear off. Thankfully, it didn't wear off, but the psychological stress was there. So now the traumatic part comes in, if that wasn't all traumatic already. I'm pushing him out and they put their hands in to feel him, and the midwife says to me, he's not coming out. And at the same time on the monitor beside me, they're monitoring his heart rate and he was having decels. So his heart rate was dropping, but it wasn't recovering after contractions. So he was in a lot of distress, and they said that it's probably the stress of this labor and him being in the birth canal for so long with no progression that his heart can't handle it anymore. They said, you have two options. We're gonna do a C-section or a vacuum. And I said, no, we're not. I'm like, we're pushing him out. So my tailbone, because it's been fractured and broken so many times from labor, was actually facing the wrong way. It was literally like in his way and up. The midwife, I didn't feel it because I had an epidural, but boy, let me tell you, I felt it when the epidural wore off, and I'm still in severe pain from it. But the midwife literally had to push my tailbone out of the way, which re-broke it or re-fractured it. And my doctor believes it's broken again, but I have to get an x-ray to confirm if it's a break or a fracture, but he's pretty sure it's a break based on how I feel. She pushed my tailbone literally out of the way while I was pushing so he would have room to come out, and then eventually they turned him and he came out with his hand and his head like this together. So both came out together, which was really cute, but my gosh, this process was way too much to handle. And so it was pure chaos. Between this time, by the way, so after I got the epidural and it finally kicked in, I was able to calm down a little. The midwife said, we're all taking an hour nap. So I actually had an hour gap between getting the epidural and then time to push. The midwives all went and took a nap. They left all the monitors on so they could hear everything. I couldn't sleep because I kept waiting for the next contraction to hurt for the epidural to wear off, but I at least got to rest and didn't feel any pain. My husband had a nap, so everybody slept for an hour. The midwives then came back in the room and they're like, it's go time, we're pushing. And during the time that I slept, I had a peanut pillow between my legs to kind of try and turn baby. They came back and they're like, yep, we can kind of see his head. The contractions have been working, so it's go time. I pushed for just over an hour with them kind of moving my tailbone out of the way and all that and turning him. And then eventually he was delivered. So he was born at 2:04 a.m. My labor was about 13 and a half, 14 hours in total.
Good cough.
I love you.
Well done. All right, awesome. Hello. For you of these now.
So cute. Oh my god.
Kelly, do you mind unplugging those so it doesn't yell at where the baby is?
He's so cute.
Oh, he's gorgeous, Marla. You did it. Coughs are good. Look at the head.
Baby, I know, such a cone.
Quite the cone.
Like he was.
We got a baby.
Look how he is. So he's only a minute
Look at
old.
his foot. Oh, Mommy loves you.
Look how he was.
I know, right?
Oh yeah.
Is he cute?
No, he's having a hard time coughing.
I love you.
He weighed 8 pounds, 12.2 ounces, and was 22 inches long. Now, what happens from here? So I thought everything was over at this point, and that was not the case. By the way, I forgot to also mention, when they gave me the epidural, because I was not progressing, they also gave me oxytocin. So I did get induced at the end. I got all the pain meds at 9 centimeters dilated, and I also got oxytocin at 9 centimeters dilated to try and progress labor because his heart rate was dropping. And they said, if you're not getting a vacuum or a C-section, he's coming out now. We need faster contractions. So I got induced. I got the oxytocin. We did do delayed cord clamping, but only it was about 4 minutes. Where we delayed it, his heart rate had to be checked by the pediatricians because it was dropping so low. So they did need to disconnect him from me. So they held on as long as they could. Then they whisked him away. I also had the what is it called? Oxytocin injection for the placenta. So they did say, we need to pass the placenta. They were nervous with my low iron and everything. They said, we don't want you to hemorrhage. We're getting your placenta out now. So that all also happened, which I didn't want, but we had to do that. They checked on baby and they heard the arrhythmias a lot. They said, we need to keep you here for monitoring. You guys are not going anywhere. And all that. So after everything was done, cleaned, they brought baby to me. I did skin to skin with him. I nursed him. I was so numb from the epidural and I was so shooken up by such a horrible day. My arms were shaking. I was like, I can't hold him. I was actually scared. I was like, I told my husband, take him because I'm going to drop him. Like, I can't hold him. So I did try to nurse him for a bit, but I had to take him off because I was like, I can't do this. So my husband actually held him for a little bit and tried to keep him happy. And I nursed him later on when I was a little more relaxed and calm. He was really healthy otherwise. When they checked him out, they said, okay, the ultrasound was wrong. He's not underdeveloped, but he does have this really bad arrhythmia. So they monitored him for 24 hours. They still heard the arrhythmias, which they continued to hear for 4 days postpartum, but they did get better every single day. So that was great. It was good enough that they said, you can go home. We're not, worried about his heart. We're just gonna keep an eye on it and check it every day. And every day that they did it, they did an EKG on him at the hospital, and it was showing that it was improving. It was there, but improving. So they said, we're not worried about his heart. He then developed jaundice. So they did the jaundice test, the bilirubin test, and he was in the high risk zone. So he had a lot of jaundice, which I believe has to do with the fact that he had fentanyl and the epidural, all of that went into his system and probably burdened his little liver, and then his little liver couldn't clear out the bilirubin quickly enough. So we ended up going back to the hospital the next day after I was in already so much pain, exhausted. We hadn't seen our kids for days because of all of the hospital visits. At this point, it was 3 days that they were at my mom's, and I completely did not see my kids, and I was really missing them. So my mom had the kids for 3 days. We still had to go back to the hospital for his jaundice blood work. They did his blood work. They said, yes, he is high risk. We need to get him under the phototherapy. I didn't want that because there are side effects to that. And I said, let's take a day. I'm gonna give him vitamin D. I'm gonna stick him in the sun in a window at home. I'm gonna nurse him like crazy, and let's try to get those numbers down. They agreed. They said, you can do that. He's your kid. Do what you want. So after another day at the hospital, we got home. So this was by like day 3 or 4. All of this was happening, and we were pretty much in hospitals the entire time, still not seeing our kids. As we're pulling out of the hospital parking lot, I just left the pediatrician. We just pulled out of the hospital parking lot. We started noticing that he was having little spasms. I knew that they weren't normal. I said, I've had, 3 kids before this. I've been raised a ton of kids, been around a ton of kids. I know the difference between a baby startle jerk and an actual spasm. And I said, this is not normal. So we called the midwife. I said, listen, we filmed it. I sent her the video. I said, he's been having these spasms. We just left the hospital. What do we do? She's like, they don't look too concerning. It's probably just a baby twitch. You're probably fine, but if you're worried, go see the pediatrician. So we were gonna call the pediatrician to say, hey, we were just in here. Can we come back up and get some testing done? But the pediatrician was off call literally by that point already, and we didn't wanna wait in emergency for like 8 to 10 hours or more. So I said, let's just go home. Let's just check him out at home. Maybe he's just stressed out from all the hospital visits. Let's go do skin to skin, relax, and just get the kids and everybody and just be together. So my mom brought the kids. We came home, did skin to skin with him, and he seemed okay. Well, I sent the video to my uncle that night just to double check. My uncle's a doctor, and I said, hey, uncle, can you just look at this video? My mom actually sent it to him for me and said, just let us know if this looks concerning. And immediately he called us and said, don't go to bed tonight. Take the kids back to your mom's, pack up your child, and go to McMaster Hospital, which is about an hour and a half away from us. I was like, wait, what? He says those are baby seizures, and you need to go to McMaster because a hospital near us doesn't have the equipment or the staff or anything to do any kind of testing for children. So we have to go to McMaster, which is literally a children's hospital. I was in tears because we realized on the way home, driving him home, that those little spasms are only occurring while he's in the car. As soon as we brought him out of the car and brought him inside, they stopped. So we didn't know anything about it, but I knew there was a correlation between the car and being at home. So, oh my gosh, I know this video is so long, guys. I'm sorry, we're almost done. I was in tears. I was like, there's no way I'm gonna drive him an hour and a half to a hospital and he's gonna have more and more seizures the entire way because of the motion of the car. I said, like, there's no way. And he says, there's no choice. Get in the car and start driving. So I called my mom back. I said, come to the house. You need to stay with the kids. We just put them down to bed and we have to go back to the hospital. This is day 4 and we are literally done, but we had to go back. My mom came, stayed with the kids. She was sweet. She packed him up the next morning, took him back to her house, and we drove to the hospital. And my sister-in-law came because I hadn't slept in like 4 or 5 days. I was so raw from labor. My tailbone was broken and it was just crazy. And I was like, I cannot sit in the back and watch him have these seizures alone. So she came with me and my brother followed behind all the way to McMaster Hospital. And we literally were just like holding him, and he was just shaking in our arms and having these seizures. So we got to the hospital. They were amazing at McMaster and they took us in right away. We didn't have to wait and emerge too long, and they started doing tests right away. They tested his bilirubin levels, which were higher still. We hadn't had a chance to give him vitamin D or do anything at home because by the time we got home it was so late and he was having these seizures. So his bilirubin was still high. They said they'll test one more time and then they have to put him under the phototherapy lamp. So we said, okay, we'll test a little bit more. But they ran an IV on him. They did a ton of blood work. Poor little man had casts. He had bruising. He was poked and pricked everywhere. And he was such an angel, didn't cry, just a pure champ through it all. But they ended up also doing an ultrasound on his brain, and they had a team of 9 or 10 not surgeons, like neuro doctors and pediatricians and everybody on his case. And they ended up diagnosing him with benign neonatal sleep myoclonus, which essentially are benign seizures, which means that they don't cause damage to the brain that they know of, but it's extremely rare, happens more often in males, and it's a type of benign seizure that occurs from a stimulus, either sound and or motion, which was the case for my son. They came back after, we were there for a full day, through the night, through the day, we were exhausted, hadn't eaten, hadn't slept, and they were doing test after test after test, and finally they said, okay, it's the weekend, it's a long weekend, we need to do like a brain scan, an EEG on him, but we cannot order it until Tuesday because of the long weekend. There's nothing for us to do more right now. So take him home, go rest, spend time with your kids, come back on Tuesday. So we did that. We went home, drove so slow. He was having tons of seizures and they're getting more and more each day. We did spend a couple days with the kids, just in pure chaos, but we were with them, which made us happy. And then on Tuesday, we went back to the hospital for an EEG, which came back perfectly normal and confirmed their diagnosis. So this sleep myoclonus is something that tends to peak and get really bad between weeks 2 and 5, which has completely been the case here. My son has been having non-stop seizures pretty much through the car. If you're talking too loud in the house, if you're walking around with him, he'll just keep having them. So it has been extremely hard to watch, very, very traumatic, just looking at your child, and there's nothing you can do. The seizures stop if you wake him up. So they only occur in the sleep, but he needs to sleep. And the doctors are saying you can't keep waking him up because you don't want to watch the seizures. They said he has to sleep. The seizures are not hurting him apparently, so let him sleep. And so it's been really, really hard on us. The doctors are keeping in touch with us and following up. They said as long as the seizures don't start occurring while he's awake, he should be fine. So now we're just waiting for them to clear up, and usually they can clear up anywhere between 6 months to 2 years. Some cases don't ever clear up and they're lifelong, but we're hoping that that's not the case. I have him on a bunch of supplements and protocols to try and help his nervous system. But that's where we're at right now. That's kind of what's been happening. It has been, when I say insane, I mean insane. I was on the verge of hemorrhaging. I was bleeding so much from going in and out of hospitals that they said I was bleeding way too much postpartum and that I should go to the hospital for hemorrhaging. I didn't. I was like, I just need a minute. And thankfully it slowed down, but it has been picking up again. And so that's been another issue with you know, everything else to take in. And here we are now at day 13, a little more relaxed and settled, but we still can't really drive far. We can't really go anywhere because we know the seizures will get triggered. So it has just been absolutely nuts. Nursing has been going okay. He's nursing way better than my other kids. He's latching pretty good. The only thing is he still does unlatch a lot. So it is hard to nurse him because it takes so long because he just keeps coming off, but he's nursing and it's so far he's eating enough. He's gaining a ton of weight. So I know that that's good. He's pooping and peeing a lot. His heart arrhythmias are completely gone. His jaundice is completely gone, by the way. So we did not end up doing the phototherapy. The only thing that remains are his seizures, and we're hoping that those clear up soon. So everything's getting better. We're doing better. It's just been a wild ride. But that is my labor and delivery story. When I say that everything went completely opposite, I mean it. We did not have a home birth, did not have a natural birth. I got induced. We were in the hospital for over a week, my husband and I, without seeing our kids. It was nuts. And I just want normalcy back and my routine. But at the end of the day, my angel is so perfect. He's so cute. We're so in love. I would do it all over again if I had to. He's everything, and I cannot imagine life without him. So that is the labor and delivery story. And I just want to say, for those of you who have been sending us your prayers and well wishes, because I kind of was updating through Instagram throughout all this, thank you. You guys have brought so much peace to us, and we're just so appreciative because we know we couldn't have gotten through this without everybody's support. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I love you all, and I'm so grateful for all of you. I'm sorry this video was so long, but that was the story. That was the traumatic labor and birthing story. And my tailbone, guys, it's done. It really is done. They said probably next time if I were to ever get pregnant again would have to be C-section because my tailbone can't keep breaking and all that again. Anyway, I'm ending it here. Have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you guys soon.